Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Can we start?
Yes, Guruji.
Yes.
Hare Krishna, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today evening, our Gita Essence program. So sincerely grateful for all of you to joining us. So we'll start with the prayers. We'll offer prayers. I will request our host to share the screen of the prayers so the prayers can start. Yes, please. Om Ajnanatirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine. Namaste Saraswate Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashyatai Deshatarine. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadhar, Shivasadi Gau Bhaktavrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So we welcome you all for our today evening Gita Essence program, which is an overview of Bhagavad Gita and is based on the teachings of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. And today we are going to start with the 15th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. I mean, this is probably the fastest I have ever covered Bhagavad Gita for our audience. For a long time, I wanted to do an overview. Generally, we do a little verse by verse discussion or thematic discussion, which takes almost 2 years for every weekend program. But interestingly, very soon, even before the lockdown have opened, I believe it has not opened entirely, right? So we're about to finish Bhagavad Gita. Just one more week. Next weekend, we'll be completing Bhagavad Gita, and after that, we'll just have the concluding session. So today we're going to start on Bhagavad Gita chapter 15, titled as the Yoga of the Supreme Person, also known as Purushottam Yoga. So before we begin our discussion with this particular chapter, let us do a little recap of what we had discussed in our previous chapter titled as the Modes of Material Nature, chapter 14. In that chapter, we saw how the modes of material nature traps or binds the living entity, taking away his sense of freedom. Yet, under the influence of illusion or the Maya, the individual thinks he is the controller, proprietor, and enjoyer. The modes of material nature, Sattvagun, Rajagun, and Tamagun, they influence everything about us, our thinking, our style of talking, our style of walking, the what kind of dress we wear, what kind of food we eat, everything around us. In fact, this whole creation is nothing but a combination, including our body itself, the gross and subtle body, is a combination of these three modes of material nature. So we are always under the bondage of these three modes of material nature. May sound a little discouraging for some of us. Oh, there is no sense of freedom. There is no scope of freedom. Can we never get freed from these chains that are binding us? Well, Lord Shri Krishna, that's the reason speaks about of this subject in the 14th chapter, that yes, we all are bound by this modes of material nature, but we can definitely get freedom from this modes of material nature by taking his shelter, by surrendering unto him. Devi gunamai mama maya duratya. Mam eva prapadyante mayam etam tarantite. So we can gain freedom. We can break the chains of the modes of material nature, or the chains that are tying us up to this material world perpetually. We can break these chains, gain our freedom, our birthright, by reawakening our relationship with the Supreme Lord. So the question arises, how do we awaken? The process of reawakening we have already discussed by taking Sangha, association of devotees, reading wisdom literatures, chanting the holy names of the Lord, practicing Krishna conscious culture. But there is one thing still that keeps on latched onto this material world. And what is that one thing? That Lord Shri Krishna explains that to reawaken this love of Godhead or our relationship with the Supreme Lord, we have to detach ourselves from this material world. In other words, we cannot have Krishna and Maya both together. We cannot expect that I'll attain the love of Godhead and simultaneously try to fulfill my sensual desires or sense gratification. Therefore, in this particular chapter, chapter number 15, titled as Purushottam Yoga, Lord Shri Krishna begins the discussion by explaining how to reawaken the relationship with Him by cultivating detachment. And he emphasizes on the importance of detachment, cultivating detachment, by giving a very incredible analogy, an analogy of a banyan tree, wherein Lord Shri Krishna compares this material world with a banyan tree. And Lord Shri Krishna starts speaking the 15th chapter, and the first verse he says as follows: Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Urdhvamulam Madha Sakham Ashwatham Prahuravayam Chandamsi Yasya Parnani Yastam Veda Savedavit. So Lord Shri Krishna defines or explains that this material world is compared to Ashwatham. Ashwatham has two meanings. One meaning is a banyan tree. And another meaning of the word Ashwatham in Sanskrit, the meaning of this word Ashwatham means temporary. So let's take at both the meaning of this word Ashwatham. Let's begin with the first meaning, temporary. Here, in this context, banyan tree has been described, but it has both the meanings. So let's start our discussion with Krishna comparing this material world to a temporary. Second thing that Krishna defines in this verse is Abhyam. You can see I have underlined that. Abhyam. Abhyam means eternal. It's always there. So how you can have something which is temporary yet eternal? An example of sun is given in that context. For example, you have a sunrise in the morning, and by the evening there is a sunset. So every day there is a sunrise, and every day there is a sunset. The rising and the setting of the sun is eternally going on. That is how it becomes aware. In our context, in the context of the discussion, where material world is compared to this, which means the creation and the destruction of material world goes on perpetually. So what is temporary? Ashwatham, which means the existence of the material world. Just like the sun rises and stays in the sky for some time and then sun sets, similarly, this material world gets created at one point of time, stays for some time, and then it gets destroyed. And then again it is created. Like that, Lord Shri Krishna explains it is temporary. Second thing Lord Shri Krishna explains is about banyan tree, that this material world is like a banyan tree. And what Krishna says? He says, this material world is like an imperishable banyan tree that has its roots upward and its branches down. Is there anything where have you seen a tree like this? Where you have seen the twigs and the branches of the tree are downwards, whereas the roots are upwards. Yes, it is only possible to see in the reflection. When you look into the river, the reflection of the tree. So Lord Shri Krishna, through this example, that this banyan tree, which has its roots upwards and the branches and the twigs downwards, is indicating it is a reflection. And if it is a reflection, then the question arises, where is the original object exist? So Lord Shri Krishna, through this discussion, indicates that the original tree exists in the spiritual world. In fact, the spiritual world is the original tree whose reflection, perverted reflection, is the material world. Spiritual world is said to be absolute. What does it mean? There is no competition. Krishna is Parameshwar. Everyone is his part and parcel and servants. Come to the material world, everyone is trying to be the supreme controller. Spiritual world, there's no birth and death. In material world, there is always this birth and death going on. So spiritual world is said to be a place of absolute. There is no dualities. There is no sukha and dukha. There's only happiness, is ananda. Whereas in material world, there is sukha, kabhi dukha. You know the famous movie, Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gum? That's the whole idea. So we have it. So Krishna, through this discussion, is trying to tell us the real world or our home is spiritual world. Our real happiness lies there in the spiritual world. But out of ignorance, we are searching for happiness in the material world, which is just a reflection of the original spiritual world. In essence, all our attempts in this world are futile because once a person dies, he has to leave everything behind. That's the reason Krishna says Ashwatham, temporary. Whatever you may do, at the end of the day, how much ever possessions you have acquired, we have to give it back or leave it behind. It's an interesting story. Some attributes the story of this incident to Alexander the Great. Either the Alexander the Great or maybe some other king, doesn't matter, but it has some very valuable lesson. And the story goes on like this. There's a story of a great king who went on to win over a great kingdom. He traveled all over the world, and for a long, long time, he went on to winning over different kingdoms and amassed huge amount of wealth, huge amount of followers, great following, huge amount of wealth, possessions, and everything. Finally, one day he fell sick, and his physician came, tested him, tried his best to save his life, and finally the physician said, "Sir, I cannot save your life. You will soon die." At that point of time, for the sake of the story, let's call him Alexander. Alexander called his general and he said, "My dear general, I'm about to die. and I have 3 wishes I would like you to fulfill. And the general said, yes, yes, my dear Lord, whatever you say, I'll definitely do it. And Alexander said, my first wish is that my physicians, when I die, my physicians should carry my coffin. General thought, okay, it's a little strange, fine. Second wish, Alexander said, when my coffin is being carried to the funeral site, that pathway must be strewn with all the golds, diamonds, all the expensive jewels and ornaments that I have looted or have amassed in all my this endeavors that I did all my life in winning over different kingdoms should be put down on the street. General said, okay, that's anyways your wealth, you're the king, we do that. And third wish was a little the most weird, I would say. And the third wish, Alexander said, I would want when I die, when my coffin is being carried on this pathway, my hands must be lying outside so people can see my hands. So General said, yes, we'll do that. But if you don't mind, my king, can you please tell me what is the secret behind this wish? And then Alexander said, when I am facing death, I have learned 3 very valuable lessons that I want to give it to the world before I depart from this world. General said, what are those lessons? He said, the first lesson, the first wish, the physician should carry my coffin. I want to tell the world that no doctor, how much ever qualified he or she may be, cannot save you from the clutches of death. So be careful how you spend your life. You may spend your life thinking that I have doctors, I have this arrangement and that arrangement, and I can continue living for long. It ain't gonna happen. So consciously, mindfully live your life so you create a great legacy and create a great future for yourself. General was really amazed at the thoughtfulness of the king. And then the king said, second lesson, when I asked you to throw all the gold and jewelry on the street where my coffin would be carried, the lesson that I want to teach to the world is how much ever possession you may acquire, how much ever you may become greedy for it, or how much ever you strive for it, at the end of the day, how much ever is your bank balance, how many properties you may have, how many cars you may possess, how many gadgets you may have, everything is useless because at the end of the day, you have to leave everything behind. Once again, Alexander wants to tell here, be very careful how you use your life, the purpose of life. In other words, trying to acquire wealth is nothing but a sheer waste of time. And the third, that my hands should be left out. What is the idea behind my hands should be left out? I want to teach, I want to remind everyone that I, the great Alexander, I was born empty handed and I leave this world empty handed. So do not waste the human form of life in fulfilling some temporary desires. Because at the face of death, when we die, whatever we have done in this world, in this life, if it is not aiming for our spiritual salvation, everything is futile. Like this, Alexander brings out a very important lesson. And similarly, Lord Shri Krishna, by comparing the material world with the banyan tree, Ashwatham, and also the temporary nature of it, is trying to help us realize and recognize or appreciate the value of detachment, where Krishna is trying to cultivate the spirit of detachment in our hearts from this material world. How much ever we may be attached to fulfilling our desires is all futile at the time of death. Just like a boy who sees a reflection of a fruit in the river, the fruit which is up there on the branch of a tree, when he sees a reflection of the fruit in the river, he jumps into the river to pluck the fruit. Is it ever possible? Because the fruit is not in the river. The fruit is up on the tree, and he's chasing after that fruit in the reflection of the river. What's going to happen? It only going to lead to frustration. And that is what is the status or the condition of our present society. After so-called so much material advancement, people are still frustrated and flabbergasted. So to begin our discussion, to have further more discussion on this particular point and on this chapter, let's define the acronym for this chapter. An acronym for this chapter is HOME, where H stands for home or hotel. And it is from verse number 1 to 5. We just elaborated text number 1 and gave you the summary of this section, but to give you the gist again. Imagine you check in a hotel. After checking in a hotel, you purchase a furniture, you tell your relatives to bring your photo frames, and you try to change the interior design of the hotel room where you've checked in and all that. You want to make it as a place, as it's your permanent place, as if it's your home. Wouldn't people call you a crazy person? Because that's a temporary place. You've just checked in a hotel. Hotel doesn't belong to you. You've just rented out the house, the room in the hotel for a few days, but you enter the room as if it is going to be a permanent place. And you spend all your time fixing the room according to your needs. Similarly, all of us in this material world, Krishna, through this particular section, the very first section of this chapter, is trying to bring out this point to our attention that do not waste the valuable human form of life and trying to adjust your life in this world, trying to fulfill your material aspirations, because at the end, what matters is how much Krishna consciousness we have become. If not, if none, we have to continue under the bondage of this gunas and perpetually go on taking birth and go into the cycle of death, birth, death, and so forth. And that's the whole idea. So the gist of this discussion is, which Krishna brings up over here, that this material world is nothing is nothing but a perverted reflection of the spiritual world. Just as a banyan tree has a reflection in water, the spiritual world also has its reflection, the material world. Here, every individual is frantically trying to fulfill their desires. In other words, we are compared to a monkey on the sitting on the branch of a tree, where we are hopping from one branch to another branch to pluck the fruits. So, what are the fruits on this banyan tree? Those are the fruits of dharma, artha, kama, moksha. And what is that compared to jumping off from one branch to another branch? Is compared to we accepting different bodies, accordingly moving to different branches. Like that, we are trying to satisfy ourselves, but yet we don't get satisfied in this world. Therefore, Lord Shri Krishna urges the readers in this section from verse number 1 to 5 to cut down this illusory tree with the weapon of detachment and to end the futile endeavors for permanent fulfillment in the temporary phantasmagoria, because it is not possible. So, to cut down this banyan tree, a tree of attachment to this material world, with the weapon of detachment, when Arjuna heard this, he began to ponder and he thought, my dear Lord, how do I cultivate this detachment? And Krishna responded, well, you can only cultivate detachment when you hear transcendental knowledge, when you hear the glories of the spiritual world and the problems of the material world or the nature of the material world. And from whom do you hear? You can only hear from somebody who you have accepted that person as a teacher or a guru. In other words, first you surrender to a bona fide guru. Once you surrender, then only you can cultivate detachment. So then Arjuna thought, my dear Lord, how to surrender? Because surrender isn't easy. There are a lot of issues that comes in surrendering. And one of the foremost issue that comes before taking shelter is, any ideas, any thoughts to our online listeners? What is the biggest challenge that comes in taking shelter or accepting somebody as their teacher or a guru? One of the foremost things that comes as a challenge is false ego, or you can call as a pride, where a person does not want to accept anyone else as a teacher, where one considers himself to be the knower of everything. Therefore, Lord Shri Krishna says, what are the qualifications or what is the process to surrender? Krishna says, very important verse, 15th chapter, 5th verse, Nirmana moha jita sanga dosha adhyatma nitya vinivritta kama dvande muktya sukado kasmagne gacchantya mudha padamavyayam tat. Lord Shri Krishna says, those who are free from false prestige. What is the idea of false prestige? Which means, oh, excuse me. Yeah, the false prestige, which means if somebody is proud, he cannot hear from others. Yes or no? What is a symptom of a proud person? That he thinks he knows everything. He cannot sit and patiently hear. As soon as somebody begins to speak something to him, he says, oh, well, I know everything. Particularly, I have this experience when I travel to North India, particularly Uttar Pradesh. And when you talk to people there about Ram and Krishna, before you even say Rama and you finish Krishna, oh, वो तो हमारे घर की बात है, सब जानते हैं. राम जी का जन्म अयोध्या में हुआ, कृष्ण की जन्म मथुरा में हुआ, दोनों हमारे नेबर्स ही हैं. इस प्रकार से, I mean to say this in English class, I mean to say, in this way, people don't want to listen because they think they know everything. So give up this false pride. Only then a person can accept shelter or guidance or can hear from a teacher. Next, Krishna says freedom from illusion. What is a freedom from illusion refers to where Krishna is explaining to Arjuna that we have to give up this idea that I am the controller, proprietor, and enjoyer. If I have this conviction that I am the controller and proprietor and enjoyer, then where is the concept of accepting God? Because I am the supreme controller after all. So if somebody has this nature, cannot take shelter, cannot surrender. And third, Krishna says asasanga, jitasanga dosha, freedom from false association, which refers to our relationships based on the bodily identification. Aham mameti, I am Hindu, I am Christian, I am Indian, I am male, I am female. All these bodily identifications entraps us into bodily consciousness. And what is the result if somebody is able to give up these things and take shelter of a bona fide guru? Krishna says the result is Gachantyamudha padamapayam tat. What is padam? He attains to the spiritual world. So Arjuna said, okay, my dear Lord, I agree. I totally understand now the process of surrender, how I should surrender. I should give up three things. I should give up my ego or the pride. I should give up illusion, give up this idea that I am the controller, proprietor, enjoyer, and I should give up bad association or association based on this bodily identifications, which increases the bodily consciousness. But, my dear Lord, Arjun thinks, what if one doesn't attain to the spiritual world? In other words, even if he surrenders, but he does half-hearted surrender. For some reason, he doesn't attain to the spiritual world. Other context is, what if one does not have a desire to attain spiritual world? What happens to him? What if the person doesn't have the desire to go back to Godhead? What can happen to him? Either way, either he's half-hearted surrender or has no desire to surrender. So this brings us to the second section of 15th chapter, where O stands for options. In this particular section, Lord Shri Krishna gives a glimpse of the spiritual world, showing how the nature of the spiritual world is perfect, complete, and fully satisfying to all. If one doesn't get attracted to the spiritual world, then unfortunately that person has to transmigrate, has to follow the process of reincarnation, and has to perpetually continue on taking birth, die again, birth again, and die again, and continue to suffer in this material world. Choice is yours. Like this, Lord Shri Krishna offers options. Let's take a look at the discussion here. That Krishna begins some very, very important verses from this section. So, very first verse, Lord Shri Krishna says, describes about the spiritual world. Where here, now he says, where is the real tree? The real tree is the spiritual world. Na tad bhasyate suryo nasha shankana pavaka yad gadvana nivartante tadhama paramam mama. Lord Shri Krishna says, that eternal abode of mind which does not require to be illumined by the sun, moon, or fire or electricity, and one who reaches it, tadhama yad gatvana nivartante, never ever comes back to this world of suffering. Now, what is the meaning of that world? Doesn't require, that place doesn't require any electricity. There's no need of illumination by the sun. The reason is because every planet in the spiritual world is self-illumined. How they are self-illumined? And that is the effulgence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Just like the moon reflects the light of the sun, moon doesn't have any source of light, right? How does when we see in the night, we see the moon reflecting a light, or it looks like a source of energy, but actually it's a reflector. Similarly, all the planets in the spiritual world, They are self-effulgent or self-illumined by reflecting the effulgence of Lord Shri Krishna. So, like that, Lord Shri Krishna says, there is no ignorance, there is no darkness, and that is an eternal place. And then Lord Shri Krishna tells, hey Arjuna, please know and understand, I am the eternal Father. I am the Father of all. Mamaivamsa jiva loke jiva bhuta sanatana manashashtani indrani prakriti sthani karshati. Every living entity, mamaivamsha, amsha, mamai, kiska? Mine. Every living entity is my amsha. Jiva lokhe, but by forgetting me, they all have become bhuta, the ghosts. Jiva bhuta sanatana, they all have become ghosts. They look in the mirror and they think, I am so and so, I am this category, I am this designation, I am male and female. You know what happens when you're possessed by a ghost? You forget your identity, yes or no? Similarly, all of us, sorry to say, are possessed by a ghost. And the ghost of ignorance and illusion, thinking that I am this body. And then Lord Shri Krishna says, and everyone in this world now is struggling very hard. Krishna tells Arjuna, Arjuna, why are you struggling so hard? And Arjuna said, my dear Lord, I am struggling. Who told you I'm struggling? And Krishna says, you are struggling. Manashashtani indriyani prakriti sthani karshati, five senses plus the mind. Everyone is struggling with that. What is the proof? You may wonder, where is the struggle? I'm living a wonderful life, peaceful life. Well, let me give you a simple example. Imagine if right now at this point of time I serve you a 1 liter water, a 1 liter Bisleri bottle, I give it to you, please drink. How many of you would be very happy to drink it and finish it off all? Yes, no, or maybe. Which means yes, you'll be totally happy to drink a whole 1 liter water bottle as I'm going to drink. I'm thirsty right now. And the other things, Prabhu, I'll take the Bisleri bottle, but later on I'll drink it. And for some, maybe I'll take little, but not all. The idea of this example is, if I give this 1 liter water bottle to a person who has been struggling in the desert for a long time in a sunny day and is extremely thirsty, now when the water bottle comes in his hand, he'll be so grateful and finish out the whole 1 liter water. Yes or no? The water is same, the person is same, change the situation now. Now you give the same 1 liter water bottle to a person in our current environment. He may not feel the need of it. Whereas before, when he was in a desert, hot, sunny day, where he was thirsty, when he got water, he was so happy. Isn't it? Have you had that experience? You have come out in a sunny day and you're very thirsty and you get a cold glass of water. You feel so happy. In other words, Krishna is trying to tell us that our happiness in this world is preceded by suffering. To the degree we suffer, to the degree we hanker, to that degree we enjoy. If there is no hankering, if there is no suffering, there is no meaning to enjoyment. Another example, let's say I serve you a gulab jamun. I give you a first piece of gulab jamun, you'll be very happy. I hope so. Well, this is an online program, so there won't be any prashadam at the end of the session, but we definitely have gulab jamun in case if you decide to come to Hinjawadi. Nonetheless, imagine I give you a nice gulab jamun. The first piece will be happy. Second piece, you'll be probably a little more happy. The third piece, you'll be now a little bit, okay, Prabhu, this is okay. And the fourth piece, why don't you give it to my neighbor? The fifth piece, I don't need it. And the sixth piece and the seventh piece, you probably would stuck into your throat and you're like, no, I cannot take it anymore. It's the same gulab jamun. You're the same person. Within few minutes, wherein you were hankering to have a gulab jamun, now you cannot even have it. Why? Because that desire, that longing to have gulab jamun got fulfilled. To the degree we have a hankering, longing for something, to that degree we enjoy. And when that longing is over, our happiness is over. That's the reason Krishna says, you're struggling very hard because that's the nature of this material world. But Arjuna says, my dear Lord, I don't think so. I'm enjoying my life. And soon everything will be okay. Even if I don't go to spiritual world, life in the material world is not so bad. Anyways, who has seen what will happen after death? Life means to enjoy to the fullest. Why to care for anyone and anything? I believe you might have heard of these excuses. Oh, who has seen death? Who has seen what's going to happen after death? So let's stop worrying about it. But Krishna says, wait a second, you are misguided and you do not know the truth. After death, there is another life. And Krishna describes about it in the 8th verse. Shariram yad avapnoti yachapi utkramatishwarah grahitvaitani samyati vayugandhani vashayat. The living entity in the material world carries its different conceptions of life from one body to another. Here in this verse, Lord Shri Krishna explains the process of transmigration, where the gross body is left behind, whereas the soul is carried to the next destination along with the subtle body. Like the example is given of air carries aromas. Thus, he takes one kind of body and again quits it to take another, wherein the subtle body, comprising of mind, intelligence, and false ego, carries the living entity, which means Jivatma or the soul, into different body after different body, like that. Which means, or which implies, Vedic scriptures categorically, emphatically speaks on this point that human life is a very, very important life. Of course, all life matters. The plant life, the animal life, the bird's life, every life matters. But human life is a very rare opportunity. Why? Because human life is like a train junction. What is the feature of a train junction? At a junction, you can carry trains for different destinations. A junction is a place where you can make a choice where to go. And whenever there is a choice, the choice comes along with the responsibility, which means in a human form of life, only in human form of life, we are given the ability to choose to continue into this perpetual cycle of life and death, or to choose to exit the cycle of birth and death, to quit it and go back to our eternal home. And as I said, every choice comes along with responsibility, which means, to an example, the lower species do not have the choice. For example, a zookeeper, if he goes to a lion or a tiger, he doesn't ask him, do you need a ghas or mass? He gives him, the lions and tigers are carnivores. They're going to eat flesh. But when the same zookeeper goes to a restaurant and the waiter comes to that zookeeper and he asks, Sir, ghas ya mas? In other words, you want a vegetable or you want a non vegetarian diet? So, as a human, we have a choice. Now, let's imagine you're traveling in a train, suddenly a ticket collector comes and he says, where's your ticket? And you say, you have no ticket. At that point of time, your innocence, which means not knowing that you are supposed to purchase a ticket, that innocence or that ignorance cannot save you from the punishment. And that's the point. Human life, every action that we perform, or in other words, the choices that we make in our life paves the way to come out of the cycle of birth and death or to continue in it. And that is why in human life alone, the law of karma functions. For every action, there is a reaction, not in the lower species. And that's how the human life is made accountable in that sense. So next, Arjuna wondered, and he said, my dear Lord, all right, transmigration happens, then what happens after death? Lord Shri Krishna says, well, you acquire another set of instruments. 15th chapter, verse number 9. Shrotram chakshu sparshanam cha rasanam grahanam eva cha adhisthaya manaschayam vishayan upasevate. The living entity, thus taking another grass body, obtains a certain type of ear, eye, tongue, nose, and sense of touch, which are grouped about the mind, which means the next body could be of a human, could be of an animal, could be of a bird, beast, tree, whatnot. Accordingly, you're provided this knowledge acquiring senses. You acquire another set of another set of instruments. And like this, Lord Shri Krishna explains that a living entity, which means a soul, keeps on changing body life after life and keeps on suffering perpetually into the cycle of birth and death. Then Arjuna thought, my dear Lord, if soul exists, Then why don't we see it? And Krishna says, what can you really see? You say seeing is believing. What can you really see? For example, look around in this room, wherever you're sitting. How many living entities are there in the room? You may count handful of them, but there are so many microbes, viruses, and so many. Well, we cannot see all of them, then where is the question of seeing the soul, which is the most subtlest and minutest among all? Because even any living entity, it is a soul that is making the living entity active, which means even the microbe. If microbe is not visible to your naked eye, then how can we see the soul, which is also within that microbe in that sense? So Lord Shri Krishna says in the next verse, the foolish cannot see the truth. Utkramantam sitam vapi bhunjanam va gunanvitam vimudhananu pashyanti jnana chakshusha. The foolish cannot understand how a living entity quits a particular body to accept another body. But one whose eyes are trained in knowledge can see all this, but not a mudha. Nanu pashyanti, vimudha nanu pashyanti, a foolish person cannot see. So, what is the definition of a foolish person? Let me give you an example. Imagine the point of a foolish person here is who keeps on changing bodies after bodies, still doesn't realizes. Not only that, he sees people dying, yet he doesn't realizes. So, what is the definition of foolish person? Imagine you're traveling in a flight from Calcutta to Delhi. And suddenly on the way, midway in the sky, one passenger gets up from his seat, has a gun in his hand, and he says, alert! This plane is hijacked. And he has a big dadi and shaven headed. Now you understood. Not like us, shaven headed. We have no dadi also, by the way. So, and he gets up and he says, this plane is hijacked. If anyone tries to move around anything, we'll shoot that person. What's going to happen with all of you? We're all going to tremble. It's a very scary situation. Our plane has been hijacked. And the moment we are about to land on Delhi, suddenly the hijacker announces, no, we are not going to land at Delhi. We have changed our plan. We are now going to go to Lucknow. Lucknow? All of you are worried, Lucknow? Suddenly you turn to your neighbor, next seat passenger. You look at him, and that person have a big smile on his face. And you look at him and you say, what's up? All of us are trembling here. Many people probably, they fainted. And you're smiling. And he looks at you and he says, De tali. And you say, what? मैंने टिकट तो दिल्ली का खरीदा था, फोकट में लखनऊ का सैर हो रहा है. I purchased ticket for Delhi and I'm getting a free ride to Lucknow. Give me a tali. What will you call that person? A foolish person doesn't see that this person can shoot him at any point of time. And then when the plane enters the Lucknow airspace, suddenly the hijacker says, no, we're not going to Lucknow. Now the plane will go to Bombay. And everyone is frightened. What's going to happen? Are we going to survive? Are they going to explode the plane? And again, you look at your neighbor and he has a big smile. And he looks at you and he says, De tali. Now what? टिकट तो दिल्ली का खरीदा था, बॉम्बे की भी फ्री सैर हो जाएगी. I purchased a ticket for Delhi. I'm getting to go to Bombay also. Free travel, fantastic. And you will say, oh my goodness, what a crazy person it is. And finally, what a crazy person he is. And finally, when the plane reaches Bombay, suddenly the hijacker announces, no, we are not going to land in Bombay. Now the plane will go to Dubai. You're leaving India? No guarantee what's going to happen. You're frightened. And again, you look at your next seat passenger and he is fully excited. And now he says, double tali. And you're like, what? And he says, na passport, na visa, na ticket, free international travel. And this is what is the definition of a foolish person. So who is a hijacker? Frankly speaking, all of us had been hijacked. And most everyone is like this next door neighbor who keeps on taking birth after birth in different species, and he thinks that's a glorious life. wherein he does not understand that now you have to again die and you're forced to take birth again. Rather, he considers that's a glory. So, who is being hijacked? We, every one of us are hijacked. And who has hijacked us? And that's the question. It's a very famous, unfortunate video, the clipping of 9/11 attack. You see what happens when a plane was hijacked. Similarly, all the living entities, Lord Shri Krishna explains in the third chapter of Bhagavad Gita, all of us are hijacked by lust, where the lust uses our body to hijack and takes us on the path of destruction, as we just saw in this video. In due course of time, lust destroys the opportunity that this human form of life gives to us, and we continue to suffer under the influence of lust. And we continue to suffer until we realize that we have been hijacked by this never fulfilled, never satisfied desire to be happy in this world, desire to acquire, to possess more. Therefore, Lord Shri Krishna tells to or advises us to take a shelter of bona fide Guru. And by taking shelter of bona fide Guru, tadvidi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya, that Guru can awaken a spiritual knowledge within us. And when the knowledge would be awakened, with that knowledge, detachment will come. And with that detachment, we can cut our attachment to the material world. So when Arjuna heard this, like some of you might be frightened right now to know the fact that we already, all of us are hijacked. Similarly, Arjuna was also a little bit frightened. And he said, my dear Lord, people are so much attracted to sense gratification. How much examples of hijacking you give, still nothing makes sense to them. They still doesn't know how to get attracted to you or how to come to you. And this brings us to the third section of chapter 15, where M stands for maintainer, wherein Lord Shri Krishna in verses 12 to 15 describes that how a person can develop Krishna consciousness or become attracted to Krishna by understanding and appreciating that Krishna is the maintainer of all living entities. And here I'm going to raise three very fundamental questions, and then I'll come back to these verses which Lord Shri Krishna describes here. So very first question here. We're going to discuss three fundamental questions to understand who is the cause, who is the maintainer. The very first question we're going to discuss is who created the universe? Second, and we'll look at the reasonings from the scientific community side also. Who created all the living beings? And the third question, who created life? Let's take a look at the first question. Who created the universe? What does the science tells us? Anyone? What is a scientific, popular, prominent theory? A scientific theory. What the scientific community teaches us about this concept of creation of the universe? Need answers?
Big Bang Theory.
Yeah, Big Bang Theory. According to which, once upon a time in the history, it was a single point of infinite temperature, density, zero volume, and suddenly it exploded. Well, if that's the case, then we have few questions for these people or to the scientific community that puts forward this Big Bang Theory. Well, you consider, you hypothesize a point at one point of time having an infinite temperature, density, pressure, and zero volume, which is non-experimental, has never been proven. You cannot prove it, doesn't exist. But they consider it to be that. Fine, if even if it exists, the question is, where did this point came from? Yes or no? For anything to manifest, there has to be something. Just like I have the clock here, it is not that it just dropped from the sky. There is a person behind it who created it. There is some reasoning behind it. There is some cause behind it. So this point, which is an effect, what is the cause of that? They have no idea about it. Second, then why did it explode in some point in time? Why? And how did it explode? Again, they're clueless about it. And third, Who created the bang and what was its purpose? This is a very foundational question, which means you don't see anything in this creation happening by chance. Anything, everything, there is a person behind it. And for everything, there is a cause. There is a person, and for everything, there is a purpose to be fulfilled. There's nothing in this creation without a purpose. Look at the nature, how harmonized it is, and how much in harmony it functions. Every single living entity to a single cell creature has a purpose to fulfill, has some value addition to the well-being of this whole world. So, what was his purpose of this point? And who created the bang? There has to be. It just cannot happen by itself. We see the light in our house. Does the light is happening on its own? The light is coming from the power source. From where does that power source getting the light? From the water dam, or maybe some, what we call as thermal plant or water plant, hydro dam, right? The hydro dam or water dam, right? Hydro dam, whatever we call it. Now, even there, the movements of the water does not produce electricity on its own. There is a person, the controller, managing that. So who created the bang? And the fourth question, if it exploded into an empty space, where did that space came from? And frankly speaking, the scientists have no answer, and they don't want to answer this question also. What does Bhagavad Gita says? Bhagavad Gita very clearly says, Krishna says, Pitahammasya jagato matadhata pitamah vedyam pavitram omkara riksama yajur evacha. I am the father of this universe, 9 chapter 17 verse. The mother, the support, and the grandsire. I am the object of knowledge, purify, and the syllable. I'm also the Vedas. Think about it. Think about it. Can an explosion, it is called Big Bang explosion, Big Bang theory. Big Bang means explosion. Can ever an explosion create a beautiful living entity like you? Can create such a beautiful world, although it may not be beautiful anymore because of us, what we have done to this world, but such a beautiful creation that we have, can it be created by an explosion? It's a basic question, and that's a homework for you to think about it. Let's go for the next question here. Who created all the living beings? What is the idea? Does anyone know? What is the scientific theory propagated for this? Who created all living beings? How did all these different species manifested? What is the theory that they talk about for the manifestation of different species? And that is called as Darwin's theory. So I'm not going to go into details of it. The essence of Darwin's theory is, at one point of time, there was only one species. And then slowly, gradually, that species transformed into another species. The second species got transformed into third species. And like that, they say apes were our ancestors. I say it was ancestors for Darwin to have a monkey-like brain for him to say that our ancestors were apes. My ancestors were definitely not apes. We belong to a culture and a history of the world where we had personalities like Yudhishthira Maharaj, Lord Ram, and so many. Unfortunately, they tell us that our ancestors were apes. And that's the reason in the Western world, people act like monkeys with their culture and behavior. Anyways, coming back to the subject matter now. Darwin's theory, he says the apes got converted or transformed into a human being. A polar bear trying to find a food, when the food on the land got over, entered into the ocean, and he tried to swim and swim and swim. Later on, he turned into a whale. A polar bear turned into a whale, and a monkey turned into a human being. There is no scientific evidence for it, then a theory and hypothesis. And Darwin, when he wrote that paper, he said, this is my hypothesis. He never said it's a scientific fact. And he said, read it as a fiction, and we made it as a science. So Darwin theory, the questions for those who believe Darwin theory is a fact, who believe our ancestors, who believe their ancestors were apes, for them is a question. Well, if that's the case, how new species are produced? How new species are produced? Why? Because the archaeological facts or the results shows or data shows that all species had existed all the times. It is not that at one point of time there was only one species. Second, how does one species transforms into another? If the one species is getting transformed into another, then that species should become extinct. But the apes still exist. Kangaroos exist, monkeys exist. What has become extinct is not because they got transformed into another species, is what we made the living a hell. And we made them an endangered species by hunting them. It offers a fairy tale story to give reasons for the above questions, like polar bears transformed into whales. Yes, some of the things definitely it explains, just like formation of a stronger species. For example, when you spray pesticides on the crops, then afterwards the insects becomes immune to those pesticides. So yes, the species develop have an ability to become stronger as the time goes on, or to become immune to certain effects, but does not mean the species get transformed into another. Yes, you can do a crossbreeding and produce a heterospecies, but it does not mean the original species ceases to exist. That's the point about it. Not only this, the scientific community also do not accept this Darwin theory. And this Darwin theory is the predominant reason why people in the world at large have become atheist and act like monkeys in their behavior, because they think their ancestors were apes. So they have lost all culture. Stephen Stanley explains fossil records show that all species of life, simple and complex, have always existed together. And there's no link between one species and the another has been ever found. This is not my claim. The claim of Professor Stephen M. Stanley, and large part of scientific community believes. However, because of certain reasons, which is beyond the scope of discussion now, these facts are not brought to the public at large because someone else is making a benefit of our ignorance. What does Krishna says? Krishna says, Sarva yonishu kaunteya, I am. All yonis are created from me. Murtaya sambhavantiya tasam brahma yonir aham bij pradapita. I am the seed giving father. Everything has come from me. If Darwin's evolution is a scientific fact, then it should be proved by the scientific method of observation. If it cannot be proved, then they have no right to reject and call Vedic literatures or the Bhagavad Gita as mythology. Let's go to the next and the third question. Um, I may need 10 minutes more to conclude our discussion for today, so bear with me. I just added some more concepts so we can have a more detailed discussion in this short chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Third, who created life? What does the scientific community talk about it? And a famous scientist by the name of Richard Dawkins, I'm sorry, he propagated the chance theory on its own. On its own, it just happened. Don't ask how it happened. And he says randomly some chemicals, which means matter, chemicals mixed together to create a single cell organism. And that single cell organism later on got converted into multi-cell and into a complex cell organism like us. Think about it. He wrote a paper called as Selfish Gene in 1976. And when he wrote, he said, please read this book as a science fiction. Don't read it as a science, but yet this was made as a science. You can search online. This is what he says in the introduction. Now, think about it. Every living entity, those who know about the biology, every living entity have a genetic code, which is called as RNA and DNA. And they're said to be the building blocks of a life. And this RNA, DNA are the most complex codes ever written, which has every single aspect written into those codes about our existence and survival in this world. And through this codes in RNA, DNA, we grow, we become old, and everything happens with us. Now, you use smartphone, you have mobile apps, you have Google operating system, Windows operating system. There is someone who has created it, not someone. The hundreds and thousands of engineers who are working to create mobile apps, the operating systems and whatnot. And the most complex code of the creation has come up by chance. This is called the glory of the scientific theory. What else can I say about it? I mean, this is what is taught to our students, unfortunately, as a science. So our questions for those who believe this is to be a fact. If you say the chemicals combine together to create a single cell animals, then why don't you mix chemicals in the lab and create life? Second, why not you remix chemicals to bring that person back to life? Second, who created the genetic code? what we spoke about DNA and RNA. Where did this code came from? And third, what is the source of a single cell, living cell that they talked about? Even if they have some answer for this, then what about the emotions, intelligence, and consciousness, which is not there in the machines, but is there in the living entities? So, like this, there are different concepts and aspects we can discuss on this and can defeat these atheistic and rubbish ideas about existence of this world, creation of this world, existence of species, and the reasons for the life. Whereas Lord Shri Krishna says, Mamai Vamso, we just read this verse, 15th chapter, verse 7. I am the cause. Every living entity is my part and parcel. So, conclusion of this particular aspect is, with this little discussion, I believe it is reasonable for all of us to believe that there is an intelligent creator rather than to put faith into some scientific theories which are neither observable nor repeatable and cannot be performed in an experiment setup or cannot be proven like that. Therefore, Krishna, in this third section that we have been discussing, he says, I am the maintainer of everything. And when a person understands, then he becomes interested in knowing more about it. And therefore, Arjuna, then that person has a possibility to return back to Godhead. So Krishna says, I maintain the gross physical body by arranging fundamental resources that provide the energy of life. Then Krishna says, I maintain the subtle capacities of a living entity by facilitating knowledge, remembrance, and forgetfulness. A very famous verse. Sarvasya chaham hidi sannivishto matah smritir jnanam apohanam cha. Smritir jnanam apohanam, Krishna says, all comes from me. So these subtle faculties are maintained by Lord. And the third aspect that Krishna speaks of maintaining, not only this, I also maintain the spiritual well-being of every living entity by offering ways and means to achieve self-realization and help a living entity escape the dangerous cycle of repeated birth and death. That's the 15th verse. Vedaischa sarver aham eva vedyo vedanta krit vedavid e chaham, where Krishna says, I am the compiler, I am the knower, and I am the purpose of Vedas. And by that, I guide the living entities so that they can come back to me. So, like this, Lord Shri Krishna speaks about the subject matter. And now, finally, Lord Shri Krishna begins to describe the last section of this 15th chapter, where E stands for essence, from verse number 16 to 18. This is also called as Tri Shloki Gita. So, all of you remember, we had this Chatur Shloki Bhagavad Gita from verse number 8 to 11. Which chapter was it? Anyone remembers? 7th, 9th, 11th, 14th, or 10th? Which chapter was it? You can give your answer, whatever you think about it. Tri Shloki Gita, where Lord Shri Krishna gives a summary of the Vedas and Vedantas, what it means and what Krishna talks about it here. After concluding that he is the compiler and the goal of the Vedas, in this section now Lord summarizes the Vedanta, which conclusively establishes the position of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. When people read Vedanta scriptures, they get confused. Who is the greatest? The formless, impersonal Brahman, or that who has a form? So in this section, Lord Shri Krishna categorically establishes that. Most confidential understanding of the Vedas is Lord Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, in this series of verses, Lord Shri Krishna categorically establishes personal form of the Lord to be the highest, and he defunct the Mayavadi concept, where they say the form is created from the formless. And the second, Lord Shri Krishna also defunct the idea that anyone can become the Supreme Personality. So let's take a look at this. In verse number 16, Lord Shri Krishna talks about two kinds of living entities, where Krishna says the two kinds or two classes of people, one is called as Shara, other is called as Akshara. Shara means fallible and Akshara means infallible. This fallible living entities live in the material world, whereas Akshara lives in the spiritual world. What is fallible? Fallible refers to one who has to again and again go into the cycle of birth and death. Akshara, infallible, the eternal living entities. And then Lord Shri Krishna says, apart from these two, there is the master of both Shara and Akshara, which Krishna explains in verse number 17 and 18, where Krishna says, besides these two, there is the greatest living entity, personality, the Supreme Soul, the imperishable Lord Himself, who has entered the three worlds and is maintaining them. Who Krishna is talking about? You remember the three Vishnus that we have discussed previously? Garbhodakshai, Mahavishnu, Kshirodakshay Vishnu. Which Vishnu, which Krishna is talking about? Which Vishnu here? And Krishna is talking about Kshirodakshay Vishnu, where he enters within everything as a super soul. Then Krishna says, because I am transcendental beyond both the fallible and the infallible, and because I am the greatest, Krishna is speaking about himself. I am celebrated in the world and the Vedas as that supreme person. So here Krishna reveals the identity. The Vedic scriptures, the Vedantas, points at me to be the greatest, the master of all living entities. I am that Paramatma known as Krishna. So Brahman is not the greatest. Formless is not the greatest. Form from me, the effulgence, my effulgence is called as Brahman. That is formless. And second thing, the Supreme Personality Godhead is already there. The position is already taken. No one else can become the Supreme Lord by practicing some mystic yoga. So Lord Shri Krishna, through these verses, clarifies these misgivings. So in essence, what is the summary of Vedanta or Vedanta Sutra? The three conclusions of Vedanta Sutra. First, the two classes of living entities, Shara and Akshara. Second, Paramatma is the maintainer of the three worlds. And third is the identity of the Paramatma. Who is the Paramatma? Supreme Personality Godhead Krishna, who is beyond the both fallible and infallible, who is the source of Brahman and Paramatma, and he is the greatest. And one who knows him, one who knows this truth about him, he knows everything. So here, Arjuna begins to wonder, and this is the last, question of this particular chapter, which is running into the head of Arjuna, where he thought, my dear Lord, what are the activities of one who has understood the conclusions of Vedanta? And the answer is given in the 19th and the 20th verse. In other words, what are the activities of one who has assimilated this knowledge about you? And Krishna says, Yo mam evam asmudho janati purushottamam sasarvavid bhajati mam sarva bhavena bharataha. One who knows this truth about me, he engages in my devotional service. And then Lord Shri Krishna concludes the discussion by speaking the conclusion or the essence of all. Iti guhyatamam shastram idamuktam mayanagah etad buddhva buddhiman syat krityascha bharata. Krishna says, this is the last verse of 15th chapter. This is the most confidential part of the Vedic scriptures. What is the most confidential part of the Vedic scripture? The identity of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. O sinless one, it is disclosed now by me to you. And whoever understands this confidential knowledge will become wise, and his endeavors would know perfection. In other words, Lord Shri Krishna says, to understand Purushottam Yoga. This chapter is titled as Purushottam Yoga, which means to understand who is Purushottam. You know, Jagannath Puri is also called as Purushottam Kshetra. Kshetra means place, place of Purushottam, place of Jagannath. Jagannath is the master of all the worlds. So Purushottam Yoga means by which to understand Purushottam, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So who can understand Purushottam Yoga? Krishna says, Maya Nagaha, O sinless one. One who is sinless can understand Purushottam Yoga. Thus, this chapter discusses about breaking our material attachments and understanding Krishna as a Supreme Personality of Godhead, as the source of Brahman and the Paramatma. Finally, knowing all this, one surrenders and becomes one with him in desire and service. while maintaining his separate identity. And this is the conclusion of all Shastras. And this is called as the yoga of the Supreme Person. With this, we come to the conclusion of our discussion on this chapter 15, for which the acronym was HOME. And this chapter was divided into 4 parts, where in the first part, Lord Shri Krishna talks about this material world being compared to a banyan tree, upside banyan tree, and there is no happiness in this world. The happiness lies in the spiritual world, which is the root of this banyan tree. Banyan tree is the reflection, and the real banyan tree is the spiritual world. Second point, that this material world is temporary, and we gave an example of the story of Alexander the Great and his lessons from death. Then, second section was options. My dear Lord, what happens to those who cannot understand about you? Lord Shri Krishna said, well, they should hear about the spiritual world. If they fail to understand the glories of the spiritual world, then they transmigrate. And then we spoke about how the reincarnation, the process of transmigration happens. Wherein Arjuna asked, my dear Lord, why people fail to understand this? And Lord Shri Krishna said, because they're foolish. And we gave an analogy or a story of a hijacked plane, where all of us are being hijacked by lust. And until we realize we are hijacked, until that point of time, we have to continue in this cycle of birth and death. So Arjuna thought, my dear Lord, what is the hope? How can person develop attraction towards you? And that brings us to the third section, maintainer, where Krishna says, when they hear about me, when they understand that I am the maintainer, because of me, the physical body is maintained. Because of me, they are provided with the subtle faculties to remember, to know, to remember, and to forget. And through me, by me, the spiritual life is maintained because I give the scriptures, and the purpose of scripture is to know me. Then they will develop. Then they will definitely develop the desire to know more about me and develop a desire to return back to me. And finally, Lord Shri Krishna speaks the essence of Vedantas, of Vedanta Sutra. The essence of Vedanta Sutras is three things. There are two kinds of living entities: fallible, infallible. Second, Krishna is a supreme personality of Godhead. No, second is there is another person, there is a maintainer, there is someone else who is beyond this Akshara and Shara. And third is what is the identity of this who is beyond Akshara and Shara? That is called as Paramatma, and that is called as Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Shri Krishna. And finally, one who knows his knowledge, what he does, he engages in the devotional service of the Lord. And in 20th verse, Lord Shri Krishna said, I have revealed you the most confidential knowledge, O sinless one. In other words, only one who has become sinless, who has stopped performing or living an irreligious life, who is strictly practicing the four regulative principles that's said to be the beginning of a dharmic life, then that person has an opportunity to understand Purushottam Yoga. With that, we conclude our discussion for today on this chapter 15 of Bhagavad Gita. And we thank you all for your kind attention and joining us on this Saturday evening. Hare Krishna, Jagadguru Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki Jai. Hare Krishna. I'll give it back to host if there is anything for me before we close the meeting for today.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Thank you for the wonderful class. Prabhuji, we don't have the questions in chat window, but we indeed have one on YouTube. So Ajit Deshmukh Prabhu is asking, Hare Krishna Prabhu, if intelligence is also carried along with the subtle body and soul, then why it is that when new birth occurs, one starts from scratch, that is, as if without any intelligence?
Yeah, that is what it means by fallible living entity. As soon as a person takes another body, accepts another body, there are a couple of things. Let's take a context from scriptures and then we'll give you some medical aspects. First thing, when a person takes birth again, as soon as he comes out from the womb of his mother, he's put under the spell of illusion, wherein he forgets everything. And that is a grace of the Lord. That's the mercy of the Lord that good we forget everything. Otherwise, remember, otherwise think about it. If Ajit Deshmukh remembered that in his last life he was in a female body, that is still good. Imagine, unfortunately, if he was in a dog body in his last life, how embarrassing would it be? How difficult would it be to right now to live in the male body, isn't it? You understand the complexity? If you're carrying that conception with you, it's a grace of the Lord. That's the first thing. Second thing, death is very, very painful. So, according to medical science, we have memory loss. And what are the scenarios of memory loss where a person forgets about everything? When he goes through some very, very shocking incident. And one incident for all of us is very shocking in our life is the time of leaving this body. It's a very painful. In scriptures, it is described, I believe, the pain the person experiences while he's leaving his body is equivalent to 42,000 biting by 42,000 scorpions simultaneously. If I correctly remember the number, even if not 42,000, maybe 32,000, whatever it is, still is a huge number. If any one of you know what it means to be stung by a scorpio and multiplied by 1,000 times, this is very, very shocking for the mind and for the subtle body. So, like that, medically, it is believed when a person goes through such a shocking experience, then they have memory lapses. So, that's a medical understanding. And scripturally, Krishna puts every living entity under illusion again through his Maya so that we have a fresh opportunity. There is a fresh life and a fresh opportunity to think about the purpose of human form of life. Or else, if you remember what you had done in your past life, the next life, when you're born, you'll be born with a lot of regrets, a lot of complaints, a lot of disgruntled or a lot of grudges against others because of which whatever failures you had to face in life or what happened at the time when you were leaving your body, so many other things like that. That's the reason we don't remember anything. Hare Krishna.
Yes, Prabhuji, that's it. Let me check once.
All right.
Prabhuji, one more question on YouTube.
Who
Janani
all do
Naidu.
we have? Can I just see online?
Yes, Prabhuji.
So request if our audience can, if they would like, can switch on the camera so we know who all are there. Yes, Vishukanpu, you were saying something?
Yes, Prabhuji. There's one more question on YouTube. Janani Naidu is asking, how did human being get negative thoughts?
By association. Association is contagious. If you take association of good people, like that, you develop good thoughts, divine thoughts. If you take association, association is the two kinds of people and information. And both of these have a great impact on our consciousness. So accordingly, you develop a consciousness, positive or negative, or the thoughts, positive or negatives, which is entirely dependent on your association. That's how. Anything else?
Yes, Prabhuji. Vinayak Prabhu, you can unmute yourself and ask the question. Yes, Prabhu. Hare
Thank
Krishna, Vinayak Prabhu. We can't hear you. Prabhu, we can't hear you
Hare
still.
Krishna. Hare
Yes, yes.
Krishna. Am I audible now?
Yes, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Just in the sloka, Lord Krishna addresses Arjuna as a non-envious one. In many slokas, he addresses actually. So I just got one doubt regarding that from the Mahabharata actually. One is during Swarga Rohini, all the Pandavas fell before going to Swarga. So actually, it's a typical. Actually, I am very confused because Arjuna is a very greatest devotee of the Lord. He even went to see Mahavishnu, and he has so many qualifications. He is going. He stays with the Lord Krishna, but what makes him just fall before the he reaches Swarga? That actually it's confusing to me. That's why I'm asking.
Vinayak ji, Hare Krishna.
Sorry if I
Thank
have
you
asked the
for
wrong question.
thank you for your wonderful question. Huh? Okay. Am I audible to you, Vinayak ji?
Yeah, Prabhuji, you are audible, but not visible.
Not visible.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, no problem. That's the will of the Lord, not to be visible. So my Akashvadi continues, and you can hear the Akashvadi. All right. Okay. So somehow, whenever Vinayak asks a question to me, suddenly there is a counter question comes to my mind. So Vinayak, is it all right if I ask you a counter question?
Yes, Prabhuji.
So you have a doubt why Arjuna had to depart like this.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
have a question. I have a question to you. Why Krishna has to depart in such a mysterious way, where Krishna's foot was injured by an arrow shot by an hunter, and
Actually, there is one
being
part.
injured like that, Lord Shri Krishna departed away from this world. Are, what it does mean? Krishna is a supreme personality. He has a transcendental body which is non-different. He's all spiritual. It can never get affected by any matter. Then how can he get injured?
Actually, Prabhuji, this is, I don't know whether it is correct or not, whether to say this answer. I know Supreme Personality of Godhead, he is beyond all the, what to say, curses of even many great people. But in the Harivansh Purana, it is said that he has got curse from Durvasa Muni, something. That he hasn't.
Okay, so I have a counter question to you. If Krishna can be cursed, then curse is greater than Krishna.
No, no,
And the
Krishna.
person who gave curse, and if his curse can work on Krishna, then that person is superior to Krishna, isn't it?
No, no, no. Curses Krishna is beyond the curses, but he has accepted it, or whether he want to play his pastime. That's the only thing I know. I don't know beyond that.
So the reason is why Krishna did that, orchestrated that pastime, is to bewilder the bewildered souls and to keep them bewildered forever.
Okay.
You got the point? Sorry, I made it a little complicated.
No, I
I meant
understand.
to say those who are doubtful, those who are agnostics, what to speak about atheists, they're gone cases. But even those who are agnostics, those who doubt the existence of the Lord has a form or not, and all those doubts, to keep such kind of people who are like, who have a crow-like mentality.
Okay.
Crow is kabutar, right?
No, crow is okay. It's
Kabutar is pigeon, right?
yeah.
So I would call it pigeon mentality or kabutar mentality. What is kabutar mentality? So I don't know if all of you agree, yes or no, but I mean, at least now we live in apartments. Of course, I don't live in apartment, I live in temple, but now these days we have apartments. But earlier when we used to have those setup of a bungalow, a big haveli, I remember my grandparents, they had a big haveli and they had a huge terrace. On the top of the terrace, there are a lot of these pigeons will come and they'll make it a whole place dirty. There was a separate place kept for them. There was a kind of an enclosure kept for them where they would put the grains. So the pigeons will only come in that area, do their shit, do the nonsense that they have to do, and make it dirty, and they walk away. You got the point?
Yes,
Right?
Prabhu.
The pigeons, they pass a lot of shit,
Yes, yes.
and they make the whole place dirty. So
Yeah.
they will do it in that corner, and with that, the rest of the roof will remain clean. So similarly, people like this kind of mentality of a pigeon and a characteristic of a pigeon, where they try to understand scriptures and then pass their deranged philosophies about the existence of the Lord. So Lord Shri Krishna wants to keep them under illusion. And thus he performs such kind of leelas, so that unless a person is sincere about spiritual life, unless a person takes a shelter of a bona fide guru, no one can understand the leelas of the Lord and his devotees by their own intellectual power. Just like we cannot understand Krishna's leelas by our own power, similarly, it's very difficult to understand the leelas of his devotees. To give you an example, among everything, the birth of Vyasadev is very interesting. You know the birth of Vyasadev, from Parashar Muni and Satyavati.
Yes,
I
Prabhu.
mean, Vyasadev could have been born naturally in a simple setup, na? Where
Yeah.
Parashar Muni could have got married and duly married and have given a birth. Why such a complicated case has to happen? Yes or no?
Yes, Prabhu.
Parashar Muni, along with Satyavati, gives birth to Vyasadev. As soon as Vyasadev appears, he immediately appears as a 16-year-old boy and walks away. And why this kind of situations have to be created? So that's the whole point. There are a lot of things that happens around the pure devotees and around the Lord, where Lord intentionally does it, where the doubtful soul remains doubtful. And who are these doubtful souls? The one who does not want to take a shelter of a bona fide guru.
Okay.
So unless one follows the principle of accepting a bona fide guru, until then the secrets, why Krishna did what? What's the purpose of it? cannot be revealed to the heart of a listener or a student. Until then, the person would not be able to reconcile these apparent contradictions like the one you quoted. Why Arjuna had to fall away like that? You got the point now?
Yes, Prabhu.
That's the whole idea. And like this, we can discuss quite a lot of contradiction. If I continue quoting contradiction, then you all will get bewildered. You'll be thinking, oh, there are so many contradictions. So I just gave you one or two. So that's the whole point. So people with like that of a pigeon mindset, Krishna wants to keep them away from bhakti life. Because if they come into bhakti life, they will contaminate the bhakti association and environment by sharing their speculations, by talking about this all, inferior practices like moksha or, fulfillment of dharma, artha, kama, like that. And they'll spoil the nature of bhakti, which is pure devotion to the Lord. So like that, all these leelas are performed by the Lord and his devotees. Okay, Vinayakji?
Okay, Prabhu. Okay, Prabhu.
I am so blessed that you are convinced. Okay. Thank you.
Actually,
Thank you for
Prabhu,
your
I just want to inquire it from you whether there is some pastime or some, what to say, means any secret behind this thing. That is the intention of asking, actually. I
yeah,
don't
correct.
doubt
Correct. I
on
understand.
the devotion of Arjuna and supremacy of
Yeah.
Krishna.
So
Just
I gave you a kind of an answer which will help you reconcile most of these things. For some, you'll be able to know the background story. For some, you may not have the exact background story. So now you know why it happened like that.
okay.
Because Lord want to keep this is Jiva Goswami mentioned in such sandarbhas like that this is the reason why Lord does it, to keep pigeon like people away from the path of bhakti so they don't contaminate that association by their speculative ideas. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare
Thank you. Thank you, Hare Krishna. So thank you all for joining us today evening. All right, Mr. Host.
Yes,
So we
Prabhuji.
take a leave.
Thank
Okay.
you.